Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of the Mackerel Solicitors webinars, in which we are going to discuss the so-called blended family and the legal considerations that arise from this. I am Alison Green, a partner and head of the Family and Relationship team, and I'm joined today by Jim Richards and Manisha Hirchin from my team, and also Tom Nash, a divorce coach of Melia Minds. Before I go on, Tom, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, fantastic. Hello, everybody. Yes, so as Alison says, my name is Tom Nash. My company is Melia Minds. I'm an internationally certified and recognised coach. I specialise in working with couples and individuals in divorce, separation, family coaching. So what does that mean? Effectively, I'm a master practitioner in neurolinguistic programming, timeline therapy, and other cognitive behaviour-based therapies and treatments. I work with individuals and couples, as I say, who are working through this difficult time and difficult life situation to help them overcome negative emotions such as anger, sadness, fear, even guilt. And a large part of my work is helping improve and foster a better communication strategy between the two parties for the better of their children, and also to help them rebuild their lives thereafter and work towards a more positive situation and outcome.
Thanks, Tom. So we're going to talk about the blended family today, and one of the reasons for this is that the latest official statistics show that the average age at divorce is 46.9 years for a man and 44.5 years for a woman. And so this means that coming out of marriages at those sorts of ages, it's likely that people are going to have children and assets, but also be looking to form a new relationship. And therein lies the matter that we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at the legal implications and also the considerations in this area in terms of the emotional side and also the practical aspects. So let's begin with the basics. Jim, what exactly is the blended family?
Good morning, everyone. Well, a blended family is a phrase which is developed to mean a situation in which essentially two disparate groups, two tribes, so to speak, come together. And you, generally speaking, have two sets of children from two different relationships, which are then expected to meld together into a third entity, which has come to be known as the blended family. And of course, it could be there can be slight differences. For example, there may be children just on one side, and then a new relationship starts, and that relationship produces children, and those children then have to be incorporated with other children. So it's the phrase which describes the situation in which people from different groups, different families are living and enjoying life together, and all of the issues which come and arise from that, which, as you can imagine, are many.
So Tom, how do you become involved in these sorts of situations?
Yeah, in very many different scenarios and different circumstances and timings. I myself actually have, I suppose, to use the phrase there, a blended family of my own. I was actually also raised in a blended family, so I've been able to experience this both as a child and later as a husband, father, and divorcee from my own relationship. So as Jim mentions, there's a number of situations to be aware of. A lot of the work that I do with my clients in coaching through is looking at the potential longer term obstacles and situations that can arise, so we can prepare for them as well. The best way is to integrate the two families, not just the children but also the adults, and the communications between everybody, and working through focusing on communication skills for everybody to understand the hows, the whens, the wheres, and what fors. Within that, we also look at how people communicate through coming from a situation of empathy as opposed to ego, and how they kind of look to partner and put this group of people together, and how they move forward in a more positive way and communicate in an empathetic and sympathetic way to incorporate everybody's aspects and angles.
Okay, so Manisha, picking up on the children's side of things in a blended family, what are the legal considerations that can arise and what can go wrong?
Yeah, thanks, Alison. So I think if we take the primary situation that we've got first and start there, so you already have a situation where one family unit has disbanded, split up, and there are children involved. So that unit itself has to work out, well, what are the child arrangements going to be for these kids? You know, who are the kids now going to live with? How are they going to spend time with the other parent? Or is there going to be some sort of equal shared care arrangement? So that you already have that to think about. Now, if one or both of the adults from that, you know, relationship then form new relationships, that's where the blend starts to happen. And you now have a situation where there are one set of children coming into a new entity, as Jim put it. But what if, you know, that adult's new partner also has children from their previous relationship? Now you've got two sets of children coming in and, you know, mixing and blending together. So when we look at that, the same sort of considerations will apply, both separately for each parent individually to discuss with their ex-partner, but then together as well as a new couple. You know, how are we going to manage our children now, so that, you know, you're okay with your arrangements, I'm okay with mine, and then how do we all spend time together? So when you do think about it in that way, it can be a lot to deal with, and I think organisation, and as Tom said, communication will be key here. So you've then got the other entity, which might be the other ex-partner forming a new relationship with somebody else who has children. So now you've got two separate blended families, but all in all, it's sort of one larger, wider blend, you know, and so the complexities are increasing as we go along. So in terms of legalities, obviously the hope is always that all of the adults involved will speak together, communicate effectively, remain child-focused, and do what's best for the kids involved, so that all of the kids feel that, you know, they are still loved by every adult involved, and they are not, you know, there isn't sort of a league table of this child comes first and, you know, I don't know, the eldest comes last because they can cope with it better. You know, there's a lot to manage there. But the legalities, if an agreement can't be reached, then obviously come and see people like us, solicitors, divorce coaches, see if we can help you in navigating those conversations if they become tense or, you know, really acrimonious, and you need help to take the tension and the temperature out of that. If that doesn't work, then we've always got the alternative dispute resolution methods of mediation, or arbitration, which is now picking up, and then hopefully that is still an amicable agreement at the end of the day. But if it's not, then that's where an application to the family court for a child arrangements order will have to come into play. And again, that doesn't have to be fraught with tension. It could just be that an impasse has been reached and, you know, lawyers and the courts need to get involved to help. So that will sort out the child arrangements legally, so that the adults have a piece of paper which is legally binding that they can fall back on if there are, you know, disagreements in the future or things just don't work out and it needs to be amended. And I think inevitably as children grow up and, you know, their routines change, those arrangements will have to change alongside. But then if we break that down even more into step parents, you know, that in itself is something that needs to be given careful consideration, because unlike a mother and a father who has acquired parental responsibility, and that's a term we use to describe the duties and the obligations that a parent has towards their kids, a step parent won't automatically get parental responsibility at all whatsoever. So a step parent really needs to consider what their role is in the life of their stepchild. And if there is agreement between all other people who have parental responsibility for that child that the step parent can also have parental responsibility, then it's as easy as, you know, entering into what's called a step parent parental responsibility agreement. And that's a 2 or 3 page document, I think, if I recall, where everyone signs up to it and says, yeah, that's absolutely fine. And then, you know, that gets lodged with the family court and that's all great. That's the best way to do it. If that's not possible, and there are situations where applications have to be made to the family court, you know, that is another way to do it. So if a step parent, for whatever reason, makes an application to the court for a child arrangements order and is granted an order that the stepchild live with them, that confers upon them parental responsibility. So they get that by virtue of that order. If, however, they just want to apply for parental responsibility without any other associated order, then they can do that as well. But one of the conditions, or something that's important and the court will consider, is how long the step-parent has lived with their stepchild. Now, the law says if someone has lived with a child for 3 years or more in the last 5 years, I think, they can apply for parental responsibility. So that's something really important that the step-parent needs to know about. Not, you know, you're not just going to know about these things as lay people, but that's where we all come in, you know, to help and assist. And then I suppose another option, which is a bigger one, is adoption. You adopt a child and obviously you get parental responsibility. But, you know, as you break it down, it becomes more and more complex, and there are more and more conversations that need to be had, which is why, as Tom said, you know, the work around communication between the adults is key.
Okay, thanks, Manisha. Tom, how does what you do interleaf with that?
In every facet, to be honest with you, it's, as you say, every situation is extremely different. Whilst the foundational values of maybe the breakdown of relationship, maybe a kind of baseline level, will have a similar experience or situation that led to it, every situation is very different. Even if I use just my own personal experience as an example, my ex-wife's new partner, sometime after separating, my ex-wife's new partner happens to actually be my new partner's ex-husband. So in our situation, we've got a very unique situation where there's 4 children collectively, and all 4 adults that have a highly emotional attachment to the entire situation scenario. So there isn't one, let's say, outside party that's maybe looking at maybe logically or objectively. So particularly emotions can run high and those relationships can be strained. So it is around how you work together to forge a united front for the children and for the better of the children. It's also working on something that I call ABC, so acceptance of the things that you can and cannot control, both within and without your house, your behaviours and your boundaries of how you communicate with each other and supporting each other in that united front, as I say, and a consistency between it as well, because that's quite a large part to our communications and to improving the situation for the children, is keeping our message consistent. And that comes down to things like them being aware of, as Misha said there, school runs, holidays, Christmases, overall living arrangements, which again can change as the children get older. I have a teenage, let's say, stepdaughter, I use the term bonus daughter, who is 15 almost, and she may well change her mind at some point in terms of how she wants her situation to be. But it all comes back to a basis of, I suppose, fairness and inclusion as well. How would one set of kids feel if another set of children were having different rules and treated differently? And then how would that resonate with how they bond and represent with each other as well? So it's around showing solidarity, respect for each other as well. And again, a huge part of this all comes back to how we communicate, but also how we receive communication, and also understanding the communication we receive. So if you've ever had a text message or an email, I'm sure within the law profession, you get this a lot, where sometimes you receive an email and read it differently to the way that it was sent. As an example, picking up my children, I could sit in the car outside and text my ex-wife and simply say, I'm outside, meaning, can you send the kids out? I'm outside. She could receive that very differently as, send the kids, I'm here. So for us, it's very much around forging a positive united front in front of the children and supporting each other. So as an example, when I've got 2 boys, they're 11 and 8, boisterous boys playing on an Xbox, don't tend to listen. I might go into my ex-wife's house and have a cup of tea or a coffee, talk for 5-10 minutes, have a catch up, discuss things about the kids. And my ex-wife may well have told the 2 boys several times, come on boys, Dad's here, get your shoes together, and they're not listening. That's there for me to support my ex-wife and saying, boys, listen to your mother, respect what she says, do as you're told, and show that unity between us to support each other so that message is consistent throughout.
Okay, that's really helpful. I mean, Jim, there are different considerations, aren't there, depending on the sort of blended family that you're entering into, whether, for example, you're marrying again or you're going to cohabit. So what do people need to think about in terms of that?
Yeah, I mean, chalk and cheese. Marriage and cohabitation are, they shouldn't almost be looked at in the same, gaze, because they're so fundamentally different. If you're in your mid to late 40s, as the average divorce statistics tell us, you know, most people are, then you may well have built up a range of assets, pensions, houses, whatever it might be, which you want to protect, not necessarily for yourself, but to enable you to provide for your children in the future. So it may be that there's parity between you and your prospective spouse. It may be there's some inequality, but the way to manage that situation is by considering a prenuptial agreement. Now, I think most people are familiar with what a prenuptial agreement means. It's still something which is relatively alien, I think, to most English people. It hasn't got the same familiarity as if we were having this conversation in France or Sweden or somewhere. But increasingly, prenuptial agreements, if they're properly constructed, if they're entered into freely, fully understanding the implications and what they mean for you, with sufficient information to enable a decision to be taken, and with legal advice, they are being upheld by courts if that second relationship fails. So it's an important thing to recognize that this is something which is no different to estate planning, if you like, that people ordinarily do with lawyers. It's simply a more advanced form of doing that. And I think it's important to move away from the idea that in some way this is a sort of a nefarious step by someone who's trying to do something wrong. I don't see that argument in relation to blended families. It's something which enables, I think, peace of mind to happen, and clarity, and those are qualities which are valuable, particularly if you have children that you need to look after as they grow up and older. So that's really marriage. In terms of cohabitation, the cohabitation is so radically different that you can't talk of it, as I said, in the same breath. But what you can have in a cohabitation situation is sleepwalking into problems. When you get married, people go into, I think, knowing, broadly speaking, about divorce, and they know that there's a financial claim for maintenance and what have you, because they've got friends who've done that, or they may have done it themselves. People don't realize, generally speaking, in my experience, the situation that can arise in respect of a cohabitant. Now, you have no financial obligation towards a cohabitant in the same way that you do towards a spouse. Let's be clear on that. But what can happen is that you can sleepwalk into a situation where, for example, the house which you own in your sole name is subject to a claim by your cohabitant because you've said things which the other person takes to mean that it's their house as well. And as a result of that, they've done things which are to their detriment. They've paid mortgages, they've contributed in other ways financially. And if that relationship comes to an end, they may well knock on your door, so to speak, and say, hang on a moment, I want a share of our home. Now, that's the thing that really can come as a shock. But there is some good news here. You can enter into a cohabitation agreement. And a cohabitation agreement is probably similar to a prenup in concept, if you want to sort of think of it in a particular way, in as much as it regulates what will happen as the relationship goes along and what will happen if the relationship comes to an end. So it can clarify that if someone is making mortgage payments, it's not intended to create a legal interest in the property or a beneficial interest in the property, that if they want to contribute something towards building works, then it's to be agreed what result that or what outcome that will have. And evidence in these kind of cases is key. If you're thinking about cohabiting with someone and you are unsure about what may happen if, speak to a solicitor. Find out. It's not like going to war. Speaking to one of us is simply information gathering, and we can hopefully give you some peace of mind in terms of what will happen if, and enable you to get an outcome that's favourable to you. So I think the message I'm sending here is, if you're planning on getting married, and it may be your second marriage, or whether you're planning on living with someone after a divorce or just generally, and you already have assets and children and so forth, speak to a solicitor, because we can guide you and inform you and enable you then to make good decisions.
Okay, so what we're saying really is knowledge is key, isn't it?
Absolutely.
When you're getting into this sort of situation. So Tom, do you get involved only when these sorts of relationships break down, or when people are looking at forming a blended family?
In all honesty, before, during, and after. So I have a variety of clients and a full spectrum of variations. So yes, particularly at the moment, let's say with lockdown and the situation, this is cause for maybe people who prior to lockdown actually were in quite a happy and contented relationship, and how the change in lockdown and circumstances has impacted their relationship. So I work with both individuals and couples in some respects where they maybe are already aware that they want to separate in a more positive way, again, for the better of their children, which is fantastic that people are forward thinking in that respect. But likewise, and unfortunately all too often, it usually comes at a phase, typically speaking, when I suppose the finger pointing or the blame game has come into situation, and there's quite a strained relationship, and therefore communications between the two parties. So a lot of the work that I do with people when I'm talking about communications isn't just their own communications, it's also outside influences. I think a lot of people that have been through this difficult life situation will be attest to this, that all too often it's a situation where we need to be operating in our best personally, but all too often we're actually operating in our worst because we're very highly emotionally drained, physically drained. I always like to explain it when I was going for my divorce, that it's like the world's most awkward game of chess. You've got to be thinking 15 steps ahead, etc., when things are quite strained and quite difficult. And we tend to turn to the resources that are nearest and dearest, the people that love and care for us, our family, our friends, etc., which is fantastic. But again, likewise, it can also bring its own set of circumstances where we take on necessarily the most positive advice or input circumstances that actually don't give the overall positive outcome that could be there, especially again for the children, as we say. The overall outcome at the end of the goal is what is best for both parties, but ultimately the children as well. So I always like to describe not having two houses, but having two homes. So having equal toys, clothes, school uniform, etc. So you don't have this classic case of what Relate used to refer to as the suitcase kid, that would go between the two houses with all their belongings. So again, and that all speaks to non-verbal communications and how we support each other in situations like that.
Okay, we're not going to touch on it in any detail here, but of course we do need to flag up that if you are entering into a blended family of any nature, it's wise also to take some advice in relation to potential inheritances, because people's priorities change when they enter into such a relationship. So you might want to think about reviewing your will or powers of attorney, taking some advice as to inheritance tax planning or trust structures. And this is something that we can help with. We've got a private client team who can help. So is there anything else that we need to think about that anyone would just like to flag up before I bring it to a close?
I think just to, raise awareness that it doesn't have to be a battle or a war. And, there are professionals such as us, lawyers such as Tom, divorce coaches, who, although we might seem like an element that is scary or will inflame or escalate a situation, that's not what we're here for. We're here to try and help and navigate you through so that hopefully things can be resolved amicably.
And of course, we do offer a free initial chat. So if anyone wants to have a chat for sort of 20 minutes about their situation, we'll try and help them, point them in the right direction, and then we can go from there. And I think it's also important to say it's not just breakups we're all looking at. We're also looking at the positive side when you enter into a new relationship and making sure that it's going to work for everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, so that just leaves me to say thank you to Jim, Manisha and Tom for joining us today. Our contact details will be on the screen, so please don't hesitate to contact any of us at any point. And actually do look out for our next webinar when we're actually going to be discussing the relationship consequences of coming out of lockdown. So see you next time. Thanks very much.